All right, so I see it's 1 minute past, so I think we'll get started just to keep in mind everybody's time. We're going to mainly be driving through a PowerPoint presentation today. We'd also encourage folks, you should be able to put any questions you may have in the Q&A box, probably towards the middle of your screen, towards the bottom of the Zoom box. So feel free to do that. We'll probably take and get to those questions when we finish at the end. If you are in need or would like to utilize the closed caption feature, that is available to you as well as one of the Zoom options that you should be able to see on your screen. And like I said earlier, the recording is going to be made available and sent to certainly the folks who signed up for the webinar, and then the kind of master list of folks that we reached out to. So we'll do some introductions. We're going to talk a bit about what State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements, or SARA, is. If folks are not familiar, we'll also tell a little bit about what is the New England Board of Higher Education for folks who may not be familiar, especially if you're from outside New England, and why we're reaching out to you. And again, happy to answer any questions, so feel free to type those in as we go along. We may not need the whole hour, but again, happy to be with you and appreciate you coming in and spending time with us. So I'm Jared Abdurkin. I'm the director for the New England Board of Higher Education and for SARA in specific. So my specific responsibility is for state authorization reciprocity agreements, which again, we'll explain a bit more in a second. And I'll have my colleague Charlotte, who's here as well, introduce herself.
Good afternoon. My name is Charlotte Oakes. I also work at the New England Board of Higher Education as a program coordinator. I focus in a couple areas, but one of them being SARA.
So thanks again, folks, for joining us. So the New England Board of Higher Education, and we'll go real brief through this, but the reason why we're contacting you, and especially folks who are joining us from New York, in addition to the New England states out there, and NEBI is essentially one of 4 regional higher education compacts. We focus on essentially supporting institutions, state legislators, and other folks who have interest in progressing and successfully developing options, opportunities, access in post-secondary education. So we've been around quite a while, since the middle of the 1950s. We're both authorized by state legislatures in New England, as well as congressionally authorized nationally as well. And we're one of 4 regional higher education compacts. Most states in the country are part of a regional higher education compact, but not all. And we'll explain that a little more, but uniquely, New York and New Jersey are not part of a state higher education compact. And for what's called SARA, State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements, that's really centered on state membership and then state oversight of institutions to provide distance education, New York and New Jersey, especially given the physical proximity, align with NEBI. So those 2 states are not part of the compact, but for SARA purposes, and the reason why we're talking today, they align with NEBI. So we work closely with the state agencies in New York and New Jersey, in addition to the 6 New England states, to provide SARA. But that's also why we're reaching out, and why at least one of the kind of core functions that we have is what's called SARA, and we'll talk a bit more about what that is. So state authorization reciprocity agreements, for folks who may be familiar, is essentially a nationwide agreement of nearly the entirety of the United States, the states themselves, and a few territories, that generally allows institutions to operate across state borders in all of the member states and territories in the U.S. There's only a single state in the U.S. that it doesn't currently a member of SARA, and that's the state of California. But otherwise, the entirety of the United States, through the 4 regional compacts, are members of what's called state authorization reciprocity agreements. And the primary benefit and focus of this is to allow institutions that are based in your state to be able to operate across the rest of the states and territories with relatively seamless processes, consistent requirements, and certainly a highlight relatively low and standardized fees. So it allows institutions to have pretty incredible reach and opportunity with some baseline requirements and expectations, kind of standardizing that process. And frankly, this is quite a development from, we're actually in our 10th year now for SARA, when just about 10 years ago, if institutions wanted to operate across state boundaries, there may have been any number of requirements, processes, steps and some pretty substantial fees that each institution would have to pay depending on each state. So if you wanted to operate in, even if it was the New England states or even the immediate border states, there may have been a number of processes and kind of expensive fees. So we'll talk more about what that looks like today. But SARA essentially standardizes that and really centers the home state oversight of institutions. And in this idea of reciprocity, essentially has the trust, but also the consistent understanding of oversight for each state, that then institutions in all the other states may also enroll students in your home state, but you're able to do the same thing. So that idea of being able to do so essentially seamlessly, and frankly, really be able to provide some incredible reach for institutions, but also, certainly wonderful opportunities for students to really have some tremendous amount of choice, whereas not just simply being limited to perhaps a single institution in their immediate home area. So SARA really provides wonderful opportunities, both for institutions, but especially at the end of the day for students. And that, again, is with a strong, we like to encourage an underpinning of thoughtful student consumer protection. SARA is also consistently being reviewed for updating and enhancing, and how can we make this network stronger and grow. So that's a bit about it, and kind of what it's based on, and really I think where the opportunity is for institutions. And I'll say quickly too, that's the reason we reached out to institutions like yours who are joining us today. I think there may be one institution, if you've joined us here virtually, who did just recently seek to participate through their state and has done so. But for the rest of you, it seems that your institutions are offering relatively high level of distance education across state borders. And while by no means do you need to do this, this is a pretty seamless opportunity to participate. And especially given this kind of deep and now pretty established network, you can see hopefully the value, the benefits, and again, especially the opportunity for your institution, but also to be able to reach students more seamlessly, quite literally across the country. So I'll talk a little bit about something called NC-SARA. So I mentioned earlier, NEBI is one of the 4 regional higher education compacts. There's 3 others, one in the Midwest, in the South, and the West. And again, virtually the entirety of the United States are already in these compacts for broad opportunities, again, for addressing and looking into and supporting post-secondary issues and problems and opportunities across the country. And SARA is one of those. And again, any state that is not part or a member of one of the 4 regional compacts has joined or is at least affiliated with one of the compacts to deliver SARA. So the 4 compacts, again, and state membership really being the central kind of reason and ability to have something called state authorization reciprocity agreements. And then that work, and again, that kind of organization is centralized in a separate nonprofit organization, the National Council for State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement. So the 4 regional higher education compacts support the member states in their respective geographical regions. And then what's called NC-SARA is a central organization with staff of its own who help coordinate this agreement nationwide, and especially on the consistency level, to collect the fees that then would go to help operate the system, and again, be able to address and kind of engage in conversation broadly across all the regions. So regional compacts are involved kind of as in a middle position, but also with our natural connection to states. States are really the central focus and decision-making body, and then working through this kind of national organization, NC-SARA, to effectively manage this network nationwide. So and NC-SARA, when an institution joins, in addition to your regional compact, which for you all would be NEBI, and we'll talk more about how NEBI can support you too, should your institution participate in SARA. But NC-SARA also provides resources to help keep folks up to date on any kind of evolving or developing policy that institutions may be subject to. There are also really great resources that can talk about things like, are you perhaps putting students in a physical experience in another state outside of your own home state? Are there complaints that are coming in potentially? How do those get adjudicated? So they can provide a really support and reach on this general idea of, okay, my institution is enrolling students across state borders across the United States. what does that look like? They collect data that's readily available and publicly available to anybody who's interested. So they perform many functions, again, as this kind of unifying organization across the country. They also provide a professional licensure directory. We won't be getting into that topic today, but institutions are likely very familiar, especially with some pending developments from the U.S. Department of Education on professional licensure, so they provide some resources there. And like I was saying, something called data dashboards, which you can see where are students enrolled, how many students are enrolled, in which states. So when if you become a participating institution, you provide that data on a annual basis. So where are students being enrolled, how many students are being enrolled, and you can see that too for all the participating institutions. If it was on a slide and I didn't mention it already, there are over 2,400 institutions that participate in SARA across 52 states and territories. 49 U.S. states and 3 U.S. territories are members. Over 2,400 institutions are participants. So, and you can see a little bit here too. I know it may be a little visually challenging. We'll share the slides as well, in addition to the recording. But essentially, again, that the student is really the central kind of focus. And I think really the opportunity and the benefits of SARA really ultimately are for students. Institutions are participants. States are members. Regional compacts, again, in the geographical regions, really support and, of course, have that more natural connection to their states and even institutions. NC-SARA is this kind of coordinating national body. And then NC-SARA also has a board that kind of oversees and governs the organization and helps monitor the agreement and its developments. And really is, I think, a tremendous a kind of connection between each of the regions. The states, of course, themselves is the central focus, but to help kind of manage and maintain this really wonderful network and opportunity for students across the country. So a little bit about what's called NSARA, not to be confused with NC-SARA. NSARA is NEBI-SARA, and we use that same kind of approach for the West or the Midwest or the South. S-SARA, W-SARA, M-SARA. So in this case, NEBI, this region, which again includes New York and New Jersey, is NSARA. And we do a number of things. Specifically, we meet and coordinate with state agency leaders in each of your states who are, again, responsible to oversee the participation of institutions. So should you seek to participate, you'd work with your home state to be able to do so. So we work with those folks frequently, again, especially on developments in SARA, what may be coming up, certainly policy developments. We'll talk a little bit in a second about U.S. Department of Education developments that could have some wide national reaching impact. But again, kind of work with them to help ensure this seamless continuation of this network. We coordinate continuing education for states and institutions. Some of you folks may be aware of, or your colleagues, very recently, and it wasn't necessarily specifically to SARA, but because institutions certainly broadly, if folks are aware of professional licensure developments coming up, other changes through the U.S. Department of Education potentially pending. So these are things that we like to try to reach out and engage kind of collectively. And because of the number of institutions that participate in SARA, not only in this region in the Northeast, but across the country, we really take the opportunity to engage folks on some other kind of cross-cutting issues too. We are also regularly at conferences and board meetings to help engage, again, on this idea of really providing this network of distance education across the country and how to do that successfully and how, again, to forever continue, enhance, and kind of strengthen these options and opportunities for students. We help monitor Department of Education financial reports, even accreditation status. So we help try to ensure that any of the participating institutions really are operating as strong as possible, or otherwise that the state, may need to intervene and engage and potentially identify or seek to help understand if an institution can rectify their standing. Because again, this opportunity to participate across the country, want to ensure that if students are able to take advantage of it and institutions are participating in this pretty seamless network, that they're upholding the highest standards possible, again, especially to the benefit of the student. We also put out things like a quarterly newsletter, so try to keep folks up to date on broader developments in SARA specifically, but also in other developments in higher education, certainly with a focus on distance education, policy, best practices, and other resources that we think are of interest. And we also keep in touch with the institutions directly. The last couple of years, we've sent direct updates to presidents of the participating institutions, presidents or similar, to remind them of the benefits of SARA, of the fact that they are their institution is a participant, of who else is a participant in their region, data updates and other things. So we try to keep in touch and again, certainly demonstrate the benefit right through your senior leadership. So some fast facts about, again, the Northeast-based SARA. There's 367 institutions that participate. If you look at, again, especially institutions and almost anybody you can probably think of or name likely participates. And what we did recently, which is why we've invited you here today, is seek to identify institutions that seem to be doing some kind of significant distance education enrollment on a consistent basis, but weren't currently participants. And again, especially if you happen to be doing that across state borders, or you may even anticipate that. And even if it's not relatively strong, or high numbers, even if it's fives, tens, or more, really this benefit allows in a relatively reduced cost kind of way to be able to participate in this network and then have the ability to reach students across the country. So at the moment, over 367 institutions in our region do. So that's New England and New York and New Jersey. That totaled close to 500,000 students were enrolled in NEBI-SARA institutions. Now that could have also meant that they were somewhere here already in New England, New York, or New Jersey. So that could have been a student who was in New York and enrolling in an institution in Massachusetts or vice versa. But we found that over 50% were enrolled outside of their home state. So certainly, again, benefit for institutions and for students, of course, is that you'd be able to enroll a student and a student would be able to enroll in your institution seamlessly across state borders. And we found over 50% of that 500,000 were students who were coming out of their state. So again, these could be students who are physically, maybe not located near your institution or in a commutable distance. And again, especially the benefits and frankly, the flexibility is that distance education have so many more options. And we can certainly see that in our numbers. We'll break down the finances a little bit more, but in our region in particular, in 2023, nearly 33 million was saved collectively by those 367 institutions. So it is quite a significant savings. And yes, that's broken down by institution and how many states they may be enrolling in, but that's looking at if an institution didn't participate in SARA and was seeking to enroll students in any number of states other than their own, what might that cost to them? And that cost is specifically based on what each state can and in some cases does charge for an institution to enroll students in their state at a distance. And that's especially so that home state can have oversight. So again, that's the benefit of SARA, is that individual states are not looking at every institution, if that's in their state regulation to do so, every institution enrolling students at a distance in their state, but rather, again, you're participating in this national network. So home states oversee their own institutions and, again, have this reciprocity with other states to allow them to do so as well. And over 154 million was saved by institutions nationwide. So it's quite a savings, again, especially to the benefit of institutions and ultimately to student choice. And we've continued to have more institutions participate. Again, there's one out there, who I saw signed up for this webinar, but had recently sought to participate, which is great. And a neat thing too is there are more students when you look at the numbers in each region, how many students are perhaps enrolling at a distance but staying in their region or doing so from outside the region. We have more students than any other region in the country that are seeking to take advantage of New England-based or New York and New Jersey-based education than other regions, about half of that 500,000 number. So really, again, opportunity and reach for your institutions and certainly palpable interest from students to take advantage of educational providers up here in the Northeast. We do want to make folks aware, and there's many great resources, and we link to a couple of them. And again, we'll send this information out to you. But the U.S. Department of Education is currently in the process of, and it actually just wrapped up really kind of the meat of their process of what's called negotiated rulemaking. Folks may be familiar with this. The U.S. Department of Education has done this in recent years. It's essentially a way that the Department of Education and other federal departments as well, agencies, can essentially look to adjust their regulation and policy, and they do so essentially with stakeholders. So folks that represent various institution sectors, folks who represent consumer advocates, folks who represent attorneys general, and others. Essentially, we're negotiating around, especially, to be honest, state authorization, among other topics in the recent months. It is a possibility, and we give you that kind of insight, that there will be changes to functionally how SARA operates. Again, right now, relatively a seamless and consistent ability for institutions to operate across state borders. There may be more kind of guidance and specific direction around that. For example, one of the ideas, this is not final yet, but one of the ideas that was put up the Department of Education was considering was, again, as we mentioned, SARA allows an institution to operate across state borders. But the Department of Education felt potentially having a limit on when you can do that before you'd have to directly apply to the state. So if your institution, in this case, in this example, was enrolling 500 or more students, which frankly few do at a distance across state borders, perhaps maybe other than an immediate border, but if you're enrolling at a distance across state borders over 500, you'd have to directly seek authorization to do so in any of those states in which you're doing that, as opposed to the reciprocity through SARA, where again there is no cap at this point. So that was one idea being floated. It's not final yet. This is definitely regulation in development. But what I would certainly say, whether or not your institution is close to or maybe even considering SARA, you may want to be aware of some of these developments. So again, I mentioned earlier, this national coordinating body, NC-SARA, has a quote call to action page. This could be of interest to follow up on, to know what are these Department of Education regulations coming out, how might they impact institutions. And again, in many cases, these are regulations that wouldn't just impact SARA, but could again impact any distance education across the country. And the Department of Education made that clear. It wasn't targeted about SARA, but again, there may be some more specific guidelines and guardrails and other developments that are put in place by the department. And we'll see how those come out. At the absolute earliest, those wouldn't go into effect formally until July of next year. So there'd be some time to understand and see what those are about. But we certainly give that caveat that there are potential developments here. And again, this is looking at, I think as folks can understand, the really incredible development of distance education, certainly, heightened, right? I think we'd all agree in the last couple of years, when we were all kind of in a position to have to go remote. But I think certainly, again, institutions, yours especially, have seen the need and benefit of distance education. So the Department of Education is especially looking at that kind of growth and development and where might there need to be some additional regulation involved. So suffice it to say, feel free to keep in touch, get on NC-SARA's email list. And again, whether or not your institution chooses to participate in SARA, this would be good to be aware of for your own institution and for yourself. So like I said, really the underpinning of SARA participation and the fact that this network works as successfully is centering the state. So each state, again, has responsibility to oversee the institutions in their state, and really putting state processes, state voice, and potential adjustments to SARA primarily in state hands is really the goal. So I believe institutions here today, and if you're not in one of these three states and you came to join us today, again, our contact information, we're going to reach back out to you who have joined us. Feel free, and we can send this information to you directly. But I believe The institutions I know we invited today were either in Maine, Massachusetts, or New York. The links on these websites, which again, will send you this presentation, the recording, and the PowerPoint very, very shortly. You would then apply essentially directly to the state. The state oversees, of course, institutions in their own state. They would then vet your eligibility for SARA, and then they would officially confirm that participation. So it's a standard application. You can find that by searching on the NC SARA website if you're curious what the standards are, what the requirements. Certainly aspects like an accreditation that is also sanctified by the U.S. Department of Education, generally at least base level of financial responsibility, and more are going to be things that are going to be required to participate in SARA. So again, that kind of level of student consumer protection for sure. We'll say here too, depending on your home state, there may be a participation fee charged to both NC SARA, again, who operates the national network, and potentially your home state as well. I don't believe all three of these states do so. You would find that out through the state directly, but it's relatively nominal. As you can see towards the middle of the screen, the average institution saves about $66,000 annually by participating in SARA versus, again, depending on how many states your institution may enroll students at a distance, have expenses that add up pretty quickly around being able to be authorized to do so in any number of states where that is a requirement. So pretty significant savings there, even when you get into having to pay a fee, certainly to what's called NC SARA, and then potentially to your state as well. But frankly, it is a relatively a small amount in comparison to what would otherwise be a financial requirement to enroll students in multiple other states. And again, a pretty seamless and continuing network of strength and enhancement. And I think that's also exemplified by the number of institutions that currently participate. And again, many publics, nearly the entire network is either public or non-for-profit, and of course some for-profits in there as well. But quite frankly, I think that's a good kind of understanding of quality, to be honest, is the institutions that are involved. So again, encourage you if you're interested and curious, and you can certainly just have a conversation on each of these web pages, the links for which we'll share with you. There is a designated SARA state portal entity, so essentially a state agency staff member who is intimately aware of SARA, who we work with, and who then works as well with the national network, NC SARA, and they would be the point person responsible to vet institutions to potentially participate. So this little wheel in the top right kind of explains that process, applying to your home state reviews, if you're approved, and again, so on. So, but the home state is really centered here in the requirement. You are then reviewed annually for continued participation as well. So again, these are kind of some quality assurance checks, if you will, along the way. And same thing, if perhaps something changes with your accreditation status, perhaps something changes with your institution's overall financial standing, certainly could be something where the home state will be in touch and potentially need to have a conversation, or like an accreditor, there are actions around what's called provisional status. But by far and large, this is a strong network of institutions, and again, centered in our states across the country, that are able to provide really wonderful opportunities and reach students, both as the institution and for the student benefit, in ways that just weren't possible, all centered around distance education. So really great network, and again, one that we wanted to make sure folks are aware of. And again, that's why we've reached out to all of you today as institutions who seem to be doing some significant distance education. And again, maybe now or maybe in the future are doing so across state boundaries, and could likely benefit from SARA, as students then could more seamlessly benefit from programs at your institutions. So that, again, was really the crux of the formal presentation. I'm going to stop sharing in a second so we can check and see if there's any Q&A, or feel free to do that while I'm kind of wrapping up here. But again, that's what NEBI does here, where the regional compact's kind of in the middle here between your state and this national organization. But certainly, again, seems from the enrollment that you're doing, from the available data, that this could be a network that's beneficial to you. So again, we're not the last yes or no on this. This is then where you apply to the state. They make sure, again, that you're qualified to participate in this network, and they officially then oversee you. But we certainly wanted to provide the information and let you know about this opportunity if you weren't already aware. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. So I do not see any questions here. So we'll wait just a minute and see if folks do want to ask anything. Again, like we said, this is being recorded right now, and both the recording and the slides with those links and information will be shared with you. I think we'll be able to provide the slides as a PDF document so that you'd be easily able to go through and be able to click that. Again, our contact information is on there too. Charlotte, anything you'd like to add before we potentially wrap up here today?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly clarify that the rule that might be coming out of the negotiated rulemaking is that if there is over 500 students enrolled in any one state, so if you're enrolling 500 students over several states, that would not trigger direct authorization, just if it was in one state.
That's great. So again, Department of Education regulation, especially in distance education, may be forthcoming. There was processes this year to look at that. And again, we'd encourage whether or not your institution is ready to potentially seek SARA participation today. You can certainly seek and get on email listservs, and those links are in there, and follow that information to see what those updates are. And again, frankly, it's at the end of the day to benefit student consumer protection is really the core of a lot of this. And that's certainly what the SARA community is seeking to do as well. So without seeing any questions, certainly don't want to hold anybody up here today. We're so grateful that you came and gave us a listen for a little while. We'll share this information. Please feel free to share it with any colleagues on your campus. Again, ultimately, participation is approved through your home state, and the agency information and who that exact contact would be are going to be in the links in the presentation that we'll share with you. And otherwise, we certainly hope that as you again seem to be currently providing distance education, as I think we all agree, distance education is likely going to be a core element, likely, of most institutions' operations moving forward, that SARA really provides this wonderful opportunity for reach for the institution and really option and access for students across the country as well. So really grateful that you came to join us today. We'll get you these resources and materials. We're going to share this with the entire list that we had been sending things to, so there may be other colleagues of yours who are on there who will get this. Feel free to share this widely. And again, should you have questions, we're happy to answer. If needed, redirect to your state. And again, certainly be in touch with your state contacts directly should you wish to move forward. And they're able to do so relatively seamlessly and quickly, assuming that you meet the eligibility for participation. So we thank you so much. Again, really grateful that folks were able to spend some time with us. And hopefully we'll be able to see you as SARA participants, and wish you the best for the rest of your semester. Have a great day.